is a requirement that the president be a person who does not risk national security of this nation and the integrity of our elections in order to further his own re-election prospects. It is a requirement that the president not be a person who acts as though he is above the law in putting his personal and political interests above the nation's interests. That is the lesson of the Constitution. That is the lesson of the founders. They were concerned that someone would be elected president who would use all the power of that office to serve his own personal interests at the expense of the people who elected him. They decided there needed to be a remedy because they had suffered the abuses of King George, where they had no remedy. The remedy they imposed was that if a president commits a grave offense, a high crime or misdemeanor, this body has the power to impeach that president. They wanted to ensure that a president could not serve his own interests over that of the nation. It flows from the very oath that all members of this body must take to support and defend the Constitution and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That is why we are here today, and it is an unfortunate occasion that these proceedings are necessary. But the president's actions have left no choice. The founders were very clear in spelling out what they saw to be the greatest abuses that would raise the most concerns for our nation. They spelled them out as warning signals that if a president violated or committed one of these, that would be a reason to potentially impeach that president. They were abuse of power, betrayal of the national interest, corruption of elections. And what is so extraordinary is the conduct we're going to be talking about today of President Trump didn't violate one of these, but all three. First, it is extraordinary that the president's conduct was a trifecta, checking all three boxes. Let's begin with abuse of power. What that means, it's to use the power of the office to obtain an improper personal benefit while ignoring or injuring the national interest, or acts in ways that are grossly inconsistent with and undermine the separation of powers that is the foundation of our democratic system. The founders were very clear in spelling out what they saw to be the greatest abuses that would raise the most concerns for our nation. They spelled them out as warning signals that if a president violated or committed one of these, that would be a reason to potentially impeach that president. They were abuse of power, betrayal of the national interest, corruption of elections. And what is so extraordinary is the conduct we're going to be talking about today of President Trump didn't violate one of these, but all three. First, the evidence is overwhelming that the president abused his power by pressuring Ukraine and its new president to investigate a political opponent. The evidence is overwhelming that the president abused his power by ramping up that pressure, by conditioning a wanted White House meeting and a needed military aid that had been approved in order to get that president to investigate a political rival. It is clear and overwhelming that in abusing that power, the president betrayed the national interest by putting his own political prospects over the national security of our country. It is clear that the president risked corrupting our elections by inviting foreign interference to knock out an adversary to help his prospects in re-election. It is why in debating the Constitution, James Madison warned that because the presidency was to be administered by a single man, his corruption might be fatal to the republic. And the scheme by President Trump was so brazen, so clear, supported by documents, actions, sworn testimony, uncontradicted, contemporaneous records, that it's hard to imagine that anybody could dispute those acts, let alone argue that that conduct does not constitute an impeachable offense or offenses. This is a big deal. President Trump did what a president of our nation is not allowed to do. It is why last week the constitutional scholar, Professor Michael Gerhardt, said, if what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. President Trump's actions are impeachable offenses. They threaten our rule of law. They threaten our institutions. And as James Madison warned us, they threaten our republic.
Mr. Chairman, the witness has violated Rule 17, and my point of order should be heard.
Point of order.
The witness has used language which impugns the motives of the president and suggests he's disloyal to his country, and those words should be stricken from the record and taken down.
The point of order is not sustained. Witnesses are not subject to the rules of decorum.
Appeal the ruling of the chair.
In the same way members are. The topic of the hearing is the president's misconduct, so none of us should find it surprising that we are hearing testimony that is critical of the president. I do not find that the witness's comments are disorderly. I find they are pertinent to the subject matter of this hearing. The witness would be able to continue, except that his time has expired. Mr. Castor is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, it's not.
The gentleman will
Mr. Chairman, my point of order is not that his words are disorderly. They are unparliamentary. They violate the rules of the House. They should be taken down. This is not about his conduct. He's talking about the motives and the character of the President of the United States.
The gentleman will suspend. The rules of decorum apply to members of the House, not to witnesses. The gentleman may proceed.
So I appeal the ruling of the chair.
That is not a ruling. There was no.
It is a ruling on a point of order. It's appealable.
That is a rule. Subject to a vote. And that's a rule.
The point of order is not sustained.
He appeals the ruling of the chair.
Appeals the ruling of the
I
chair.
move to table
The motion is made to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair. The motion.
Move the motion to table is made in writing.
Motion to table.
Move the motion is made
Motion
in
table is
writing.
not in debate. Is not. All in favor of the motion to table. All in favor of the motion to table will say aye. Aye. Point. Opposed, no. No. The motion to table.
She has to put it in writing first, then you can call the vote.
And Mr. Castro, you made a point. Well, let me ask you a question. As an experienced investigator, is it your experience that when someone has done something wrongful or corrupt, and they're dealing with somebody who's not in the scheme, that they state their intentions to do something wrongful and corrupt? Is that your experience as an investigator?
Well, I mean, are you talking about the call
I'm
transcript?
just asking you in general.
General?
In general.
You're saying that the schemer
Yes.
would talk about his scheme?
Would he generally admit that he was doing something wrongful and corrupt to someone not in the scheme?
No.
In fact, you made a big point, sir, in your presentation, that on that call, President Trump did not go further and tell President Zelensky that he wanted the investigation announced to help his 2020 election.
He definitely did not talk about 2020.
Yeah. And Mr. Goldman, would you agree that if President Trump was acting corruptly, wrongfully, abusing his power, that it was unlikely he was going to confess to President Zelensky that he was asking for the investigation explicitly to help his 2020 election prospects?
Yeah, in my experience as 10 years as a prosecutor, you almost never have a defendant or someone who's engaging in misconduct who would ever explicitly say, in this case, President Zelensky, I'm going to bribe you now, or I'm going to ask for a bribe, or I am now going to extort you. That's not the way these things work.
So in here it says that you said Ms. Williams said that she found it to be, quote, unusual and nothing more. Let's look at slide 7 if we may. Let's look at, it says unusual, correct?
Right, but it doesn't say and nothing more.
No, it says unusual. Isn't it a fact, sir, that what Ms. Williams says is it struck her as unusual and inappropriate? Isn't that correct, sir?
Okay.
That's what she said in her testimony.
Okay.
And in your staff report, you left out the inappropriate part, didn't you?
It wasn't a block quote. It was, she felt it was unusual. She didn't raise the concerns to Lieutenant General Kellogg.
So, sir, let me ask you, were you as fair to the American people in describing what Ms. Williams said as you were in describing everything else in your report?
I don't have an issue with the way we described Ms. Williams' testimony.
Well, let's look at what else Ms. Williams said. Can we put up slide 8? This is from Ms. Williams' public testimony at 34. She said, quote, I thought that the references to specific individuals in investigations such as former Vice President Biden and his son struck me as political in nature, given that former Vice President is a political opponent of the President. So you left that out of your staff report too, didn't you?
You know, Ms. Williams,
Sir, did you leave that out of your report, yes or no?
if you're telling me I did, I mean, I don't know as I sit here right now whether that's in the
I'm
report.
telling you, you did.
Okay.
Well, how many subpoenas were issued to AT&T?
I don't know. If you'd like me to find
That's
out during
fine.
the
If you
break,
don't
I'd
know,
be happy
then,
to.
then, again, maybe your chairman could be here to actually answer this. Was it targeted at a single telephone number or numbers?
We subpoenaed for call records, multiple numbers.
How many?
I don't know. None of, this is
Okay,
very important,
let's just
though.
stop here.
None
Just-
of members of Congress, none of staff of Congress.
Oh, we're getting to that.
None of
We're
journalists.
getting to that.
We only did it to the subjects who were involved in the investigation, which is a very routine and standard investigative practice, sir.
And you're not going to hear anything from me about a subpoena and the legality of a subpoena. My problem is this. Who on the committee asked that those numbers that you actually did put into for a subpoena and get those numbers back? Who was it that asked that they be cross-checked for members of the media and members of the Congress? Who ordered that?
I don't think that's how we did it, sir.
No, whoa. You came out with a report that actually showed these people, such as Mr. Chairman Nunez and others, were actually on these calls.
Yes.
Now, someone, and you and I, we're not going to play cute here. Somebody took the 4 records that you asked for, at least 4, took those numbers and then said, hey, let's play match game. Who ordered the match game for members of Congress and the press? Was it you?
I don't think anyone did, sir.
Then how did you get, yeah, okay, come on, that's the most ridiculous item I've ever heard. You don't just all of a sudden pick up numbers in which you have to match those numbers to actually show where they are, and you don't come up with them. Who ordered them to actually match for members of Congress and the press?
That's actually what you just described is exactly how it happens.
You pick
an
who
event-
ordered to find out if Nunez's number was on those calls?
If I could just explain, sir. You pick an event of significance in the investigation, and you look for sequencing and patterns surrounding that event. You look then at the numbers, and you try to identify what those numbers are, and then you start to build the circumstantial case.
At this point, that's a wonderful explanation, but not an answer to my question. Those are you looking for the 4 numbers you asked for and to see how they're connected. I understand the subpoena that you issued. My question directly, was it you or was it Chairman Schiff that said, while we're doing this, let's see if this matches Chairman Nunez's number. Let's see if this matches a member of the press's number. Somebody along the way just didn't all of a sudden have an epiphany, unless you're getting ready to throw a low-level staffer under the bus, that these numbers might match. So who did it? Was it Chairman Schiff or was it you? Be careful, you're under oath.
I know I'm under oath, sir.
Then answer the
Doesn't
question.
matter, and I will answer the question, if you give me a second here. It's not a simple
The
answer.
same second that was not afforded to my witness, by the way.
Well, I think he was allowed to
Who
answer
decided to
the
leak
question.
it, by the way? If you're not going to tell me the other story, while you're thinking about how you're going to answer that question, who decided to leak it? The information. Why did you include it in the report?
That's not a leak, sir.
Why did you include it in the report? After not saying anything else about this, not publicly known. So 2 questions are hanging out that everybody's looking for an answer for, including me. Who ordered it? Was it you or was it Chairman Schiff? And then why was it decided, except for nothing but smear purposes, to be included in the Schiff report?
Well, I'm not going to get into the deliberations of our investigation with you, and I will tell you the reason it was included in the report is because the calls were surrounding important evidence to our investigation. And I think that your question is frankly not better directed not at me, but at the people who were having conversations.
Oh, no, we're not going to
people
play that
involved
game.
in
No,
the
we're not going to play that
president's
game. You're as good as Mr. Burke. You're not going to play that game. You're not answering the question. And every member of the media, everybody here, when you start going into the decorum of this House, when you start looking at members' telephone numbers, you start looking at reporters' telephone numbers, which they ought to be scared about, you took a subpoena for 4. And then you decided to play match game. You found numbers that you thought were like, some of them actually didn't exist because they claimed that they were for the White House Budget Office, and they were not. So we're throwing stories out there because nobody was out there acting. So I go back to my question. Are you going to go on record in front of everybody here today and say that you will not tell who ordered this, you or Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman, you or Mr. Schiff?
I am going to go on record and tell you that I'm not going to reveal how we conducted this investigation.
And that's the problem we have with this entire thing. Mr. Schiff said behind closed doors.
I can tell you what the importance is.
I'm done with you for right now. We're done.